If you would go to the daily participation and click on resubmit, a text box should open up. Make sure you type in 3 significant things from today's lesson. First of all, today we'll talk about problems with legislation because it isn't easy to pass laws. Many bills end up dying inside Congress or even in state legislature at the committee level. Some don't even get off the ground and get put down at actual paper. There are a number of reasons why this happens and why good laws don't always necessarily get passed. One of them is pork. Pork is a nickname for any type of added amendment or item onto a bill that benefits one particular state or district or one particular congressman or senator or representative at the state level that's only for them and won't benefit the entirety of the country or state. For instance, if you were in Congress in the House and you had a difficulty passing a bill, maybe you only had 217 people in favor of it, but you need 218, there might be one person that would say, well, I'll vote for this bill that is meant to give money to interstate highways if you help build a bridge in a park in my town. That would be an example of pork because it's really only going to benefit him. It's going to make him look good to his constituents, his voters. And so it really isn't going to help everyone. Now, you might say, well, that sounds terrible. That's pretty selfish. That shouldn't be allowed. And it's true because it does take up more time and it makes people hold out on purpose so they can negotiate these kind of things. But at the same time, what if this was a really important transportation bill to help the interstates, but you didn't have that one vote? Is it better just to buy them off with this pork project and pass it, or should you not do that so it doesn't encourage it in the future? Next thing would be budget constraints. Obviously, there's only so much money. The government spends between $2 and $3 trillion a year at the federal level, tens of billions of dollars at each of the state levels, and they only have so much tax revenue that comes in and they can only borrow so much. The states are incredibly limited. They have to purposely balance their budgets while the federal government can sell debt in the form of bonds. That's how they borrow money. They sell bonds to the American citizens and people elsewhere. And they can only sell so much. There is a debt ceiling or debt limit that Congress has placed on itself. Now, they can always raise that, but that's obviously a difficult situation they put themselves in. And plus, the more debt that we incur, we end up having to pay more and more interest. And so there isn't always enough money to do everything. And that might upset the people. In California, their legislature, for instance, has approved a lot of programming over the years that costs lots of money. And when they had budget problems, the voters were given a choice. It was put on their ballots. You can cut this program and this program and this program and this program, but the people didn't want to do any of that. So it's a difficult choice, and it's not just legislators that have a difficulty in keeping to the budget. It's also the voters as well. And then there's popularity. There might be something that's really important to do that would be essential for the long-term health of our nation, uh, making our system better, making sure that government works better, making sure that we have the best military possible, or transportation systems, or trade protections. But it might be unpopular. And for instance, right now, in economics, we'll learn that free trade is actually incredibly important to improving the lives of everybody. It just doesn't send jobs overseas. It helps open markets for the United States. It allows us to sell more products. It helps improve the job market. It increases competition for labor. It increases competition for goods and services. And so everyone is motivated to do better. And it helps raise standard of living for the entire world. But of course, some people do lose their jobs in the process. That's with any type of economic change. And so those people make their voices known, and everyone, of course, feels sorry for them. And that means that free trade often is looked at in a negative way, even though it's better for everybody. So sometimes popularity can stop good legislation from being passed. And then there's gerrymandering. That is when, after the census, the state legislatures can change the districts in a state to make sure that there's equal population within each of those districts, and they can change the shapes. That way, the borders might cut a particular city or county in half, making sure that they can't all vote in the same district, and that might give a particular party an advantage in the election. And this also creates a situation where you have districts where the overwhelming vote is Democratic or the overwhelming vote is Republican, so there's not a lot of competition. So you get people that represent Congress that are incredibly radical, because if you have, 70% Republicans or 70% Democrats, when you run in the primaries for the nomination, you're going to go as far to the right or the left to get their votes. And then when you get to Congress, because you're most assuredly winning the general election in the fall with that big of an advantage, you're going to take extreme points of view, and that makes it difficult to pass compromise legislation. And it also means that people are less willing to sit down together. They're less willing to work together when you have the two parties in more radical positions more and more with gerrymandering. And the last one would be lobbyists. Lobbyists, of course, are individuals that are hired by businesses, trade organizations, interest groups, labor unions, environmental groups, for instance. These individuals that are hired, and sometimes they're former Congress people, they have all kinds of offices in Washington, D.C., and they meet and greet and work with members of Congress, and they can give them ideas, and they can point out why things are good or bad to pass legislation, but they can also use basically campaign intimidation, threatening to help back an opponent if they pass a certain law that they don't like. The lobbyists can promise campaign funds or sponsorship or advertising on behalf of the candidates when they run for office. And so this can help influence legislation. And many people think, of course, this is just all a legal and allowed form of bribery, and that lobbying should be greatly restricted. Of course, that brings in First Amendment problems, because how can you stop people from going and visiting congresspersons and advocating their views? So these are just some of the problems with legislation. So please make sure that you type 3 significant points in the text box and click submit.